Pretty much every word I'm about to say is a spoiler. So if you haven't played Firewatch yet and you'd like to go in cold, this would be a great place to stop. But if you're still with me, let's go for a walk. One of the great things about games is the momentary illusion of control that they give us, that sense that the events around us are just waiting for us to act, and that even though most of our decisions don't really matter, at key moments our choices carry a weight that can move the world. They tell us we can change the ending. But Firewatch isn't like that. In Firewatch, the big moments are almost entirely out of your control. In the end, there's always going to be a fire, and there's nothing you can do to stop that from happening. But you can change the person that's there to see it. Firewatch is set in Shoshone National Park, but it doesn't start there. It starts here, in Boulder. The game tells us from the opening moments, you are Henry. And at this particular point, you're drunk. Despite this, Julia sees something in Henry, in you. This is a love story. When I finally got around to installing Firewatch, I'd already heard a lot about the game, and I'd heard a lot about the ending. And whether people loved it or hated it, the one thing most of the commenters seemed to agree on is that it hurt. But the pain of the ending was nothing compared to what Firewatch's opening moments put me through. As it goes on, you and Julia build a life together, full of tiny triumphs and petty bickering and picking out a dog together. It's a life built on choices. A few we see, thousands we don't. To me, Henry and Julia's relationship felt real. But in real relationships, in real life, sometimes things go wrong. After a series of incidents, Julia is sent home from her job, and the game asks you to choose. Do you suggest that the two of you talk to someone, or do you try to help her put it behind her? Either way, Julia always gets sick. At the age of 41, she's diagnosed with early onset dementia, and there's no path you can guide Henry down that can stop that from happening. Eventually, despite your best or even your worst efforts, her care is taken out of Henry's hands. Lost and alone, Henry sees an ad for Firewatch lookouts in the local paper. And suddenly, there's no choice left at all. In Firewatch, all roads lead to the woods. It takes Henry 2 days of hard hiking to get to his new home in Two Forks Tower. All he wants when he gets there is a little shut-eye. Instead, he almost immediately gets a call from Delilah, his new boss.
It's Henry, right?
Yeah.
I'm Delilah.
Yeah, that's what the guy said on the phone.
So what's wrong with you?
Excuse me?
Henry doesn't give a proper answer. He can't. In his mind, there is something wrong with him. He's mourning the loss of two people who never existed. The person Julia could have been had she never gotten sick, and the person he should have been when she did. All roads lead to the woods, but it still matters how you get there. You spend a lot of your first day trying to find out what kind of person thinks it's a good idea to set off fireworks in the middle of a bone-dry forest. Teenagers think that's a good idea. My journey to the lake took me through the game's stunning scenery, and thanks to a snapped rope, also sent me plummeting down a shale slide I regret naming Widowmaker. It's a long walk just to tell a couple of naked people to please stop trying to burn down the world. And no matter how nicely or rudely you ask, the teens do not take to Henry at all. You might not be able to choose how the teens react to you, but you can choose how you react to them. I'm not sure what it says about me that I had Henry steal their booze and heave their stereo into the lake, but it's probably nothing good. At least it's a lovely walk back to Two Forks. Delilah apologizes to Henry for butting into his personal life, all while dishing out some excruciating lightning puns. Something like the start of a friendship builds over the course of the walk up the ravine and through a small cave system. It was one of my favourite parts of the game, at least until this happened. It's pretty creepy, but Delilah blows it off. After all, part of the fun of the woods is running into random weirdos with flashlights, right? Right. I'm sure that'll be fine. The first sign that something's wrong is when the only phone line to the outside world is cut. It takes another hike through the wilderness and finding another trail of cheap beer to reveal a severed cable and several signs that the teenagers might have been a bit annoyed about me dunking their stereo. Delilah is, understandably, unhappy about the discovery, and whether you're on board or not, Delilah sends you after the teenagers with instructions to scare the hell out of them. Of course, that does mean you're going to have to find them first. Fortunately, the teens are not being subtle, and shortly thereafter a thin plume of smoke sends you a signal. Nudist fireworks enthusiasts are here. And that was a weird sentence to say out loud. Still, at least I ran across an abandoned pack on the way to find our ill-advised vengeance. A pack that belongs to someone named Brian Goodwin. It turns out Delilah knew 12-year-old Brian and his father Ned. She tells you they were in Two Forks before you, but the combination of boredom, isolation, and untreated PTSD was too much for Ned, and he and Brian left the woods in a hurry. But Brian's loss is your gain, and not only do you score enough ropes to navigate the wilderness, you get a little disposable camera too. Brian's ropes are the key that unlocks the rest of Shoshone. Despite a smoke trail and clear instructions, I still got lost twice on the way to the campsite the teens had set up. My real-life, horrifically poor sense of direction bleeding into Henry's universe. The camp's deserted. They must have heard me blundering through the bush and taken off. That said, I'm not sure if either Henry or I had any idea what we would have done if they'd actually been there. So that's okay. Yeah, it's not okay. The camp is trashed, and there's a note left for you that starts, "Dear Psycho," and gets worse from there. On top of that, not long after finding the camp, you hear that the teens have been reported missing. Henry might well have been the last person to see them alive, and there is absolutely no doubt that Delilah should tell someone about what happened. But she doesn't. And nothing you say to her will change that. But are you the Henry that said she should say something? Or are you the Henry that agreed to stay quiet? Despite what you might think, despite what I thought, Henry's job as a Firewatch is not to stop forest fires. In fact, there's already a wildfire burning not long after you start the game. There was always going to be a fire, but this one's small and far enough away not to be an immediate worry. I named it June. Delilah and Henry grow close over the course of the game, but you never actually see her. And there's no choice you can make that will change that. Although if you're so inclined, you can engage in what, for the sake of the algorithm, I'm going to refer to as shortwave radio grown-up fun times. But fire or no fire, budding romance or deepening friendship, sitting alone in a tower in the woods quickly gets monotonous, and so does the food. So much so that Henry decides to do a spot of mildly illegal fishing. My version of Henry was very bad at fishing. What he was good at, though, is picking up litter. So of course, when I saw a random clipboard by the lake, I picked it up. Someone had been listening, watching, and evaluating everything Henry and Delilah had been saying. Our two-way conversation had a third party. And when I found that third party's radio, that's when things started to go south fast. Henry recovers quickly. Angry and disoriented, he follows the one clue he remembers from the now missing clipboard to a research station out in the woods. A station that isn't meant to be there. It takes a creative approach to lockpicking to get inside, but when you do, you find everything. Notes, psych evaluations, tracking devices, it's a lot to take in. It's too much.
I'm so sick of letting these people do this to us. We should just burn the place down.
No matter what you say to Delilah, whether you talk her down or agree with her that it's time to start torching evidence, it's out of your hands. While you were talking about setting a fire, someone else was actually lighting the match. The only thing your choices changed was you. So who did you choose to be? The June fire is no longer a background event. Finding out you're in the path of a poorly controlled wildfire is bad enough, but there's a surprise waiting for Henry and Delilah when he gets back to the tower.
I'm so sick of letting these people do this to us. We can just burn the place down.
Delilah.
What? Think about it.
I am.
It's a very 1980s style of blackmail, but the edited cassette tape paints an ugly picture of Delilah and Henry starting the fire that's about to eat Shoshone. There was always going to be a fire, but now it looks like you were the one that started it. And whatever company or government or thing has you and Delilah in its sights seems quite prepared to blackmail you into staying quiet. The relationship developing between Henry and Delilah takes a backseat to paranoia and the fear of a grand conspiracy. But there is no grand conspiracy. There's no espionage, no experiment. Even the missing teenagers turn out to be missing because they got themselves arrested for stealing a tractor. The spectre that's been haunting Henry and Delilah isn't a government spook, a mad scientist, or even a disgruntled teenager. It's Ned, the man who lived in Two Forks before you. A small, sad conspiracy of one. Delilah was wrong. The backpack you found with the ropes and the camera did belong to Brian Goodwin, but neither Brian nor Ned ever left the woods. Ned had decided to drag Brian out to Two Forks with him, all to get his wizards and wyverns loving son to toughen up, to get his hands dirty, to be the kind of man that Ned could understand, could relate to. For me, Firewatch is a game about the way decisions change us even if that's all they change. But at no point does Firewatch say all decisions are meaningless. There are clues that point towards Ned and Brian having a shared interest in tinkering with electronics, radios in particular. Ned could have chosen to follow that thread. He could have chosen the son Brian actually was. Instead, he chose to force Brian into being the son Ned thought he should have been. And Brian died. Every terrible thing that Ned has done, every decision he's made is to prevent this moment, to stop the discovery of Brian Goodwin's body. And you found him anyway. And whether or not Brian's death was the result of a single murderous decision or the unstoppable consequences of 1,000 tiny choices, Brian died because of Ned. But Ned can't accept that. He's stuck in an endless loop of rage and pain, unable to take responsibility for his own actions. Towards the very end of the game, you get a last cassette tape from him. And despite the fact that the fire is turning the wilderness around you into heat and light, he's still blaming Brian.
But you gotta know I didn't kill him. All right, we were climbing. I was teaching him. Brian was uneducated in the way to do anything. He just fucking didn't sink his anchor the right way.
That's why he invented the conspiracy. Why he blackmailed you. If Brian's death comes to light, Ned will no longer be able to hide from his choices. And he's willing to burn down the world to stop that from happening. But it doesn't matter. Not for Ned. He's not like Henry or even Delilah. Ned's decision to set the fire changes everything except him. Because no matter where he goes, no matter what he does, in his mind, Ned is always going to be trapped in those woods. As the June fire goes from small disaster to localized apocalypse, not only do we have to run from the fire, we have to tell Delilah the truth. That it was all just a lonely, damaged man desperately trying to cover up his own guilt and shame. There might not have been a sinister conspiracy, but it wasn't all a lie. There was a love story. Henry and Julia's love story. And that story isn't over yet. In the end, as Henry calls out over the radio from Delilah's abandoned Firewatch tower, Delilah tells Henry exactly that. And as painful as it is to hear, she's right. Henry needs to go back to Julia. Even if she's too far gone to know he's there, even if his decision changes nothing for anyone else, choosing to go to her will change how he sees himself forever. A lot of players found the game's core theme to be, you can't run from your problems, and some even felt it was a direct dig at players using games as a way to escape their real-world issues. And I can definitely see why. But that's not what I took away from Firewatch. For me, the game's message was that our choices still matter, even if the only thing they end up changing is us. In Firewatch, Julia always gets sick. Henry always ends up at Two Forks Tower, Brian Goodwin always dies, Delilah always leaves, and there is always a fire. All roads lead to the woods. But how we get there still matters. The story always ends the same way. But the person that's there to see it, that's up to you.